You wouldn't believe the nightmare my dad went through. All because of a few stubborn neighbors who thought wearing fake uniforms gave them power. It was a quiet Saturday morning when everything started. My dad, a retired carpenter who's lived in the same house for 30 years, was sitting on the porch sipping his coffee and reading the paper. He's the kind of man who minds his business, helps neighbors fix fences for free, and waves at everyone. But that didn't matter to the HOA, or rather, the people pretending to run it. For months, they'd been circling his house like vultures, leaving threats in his mailbox about community violations. First, it was the color of his shutters. Then, it was the wooden swing set in the backyard for the grandkids. Eventually, it boiled down to his American flag, which they claimed was not regulation size. My dad laughed the letters off at first, thinking they were bluffing. But these people weren't just paper bullies. They called themselves the HOA Enforcement Division, complete with black tactical vests that said HOA CUP across the chest. They patrolled in cheap SUVs with magnetic decals slapped on the doors, flashing imitation lights like they were the real deal. That morning, my dad was alone in the house when the knock came. Not a friendly knock. A pounding, the kind that rattles the screen door. He stood up, muttering to himself, "What now?" and opened it. 3 men stood there in full black, radios buzzing on their shoulders, one with a clipboard in hand. The tallest one shoved a paper in his face. "Final notice. You've been fined repeatedly for violations. We're here to collect double quotes." Dad, being who he is, didn't flinch. "You're not collecting a dime. I paid my taxes, I paid my bills, and I don't owe you a thing. Now get off my porch." He tried to shut the door, but the tallest man jammed his boot against it. My dad's voice hardened. "Move your foot." That's when things turned ugly. Without warning, 2 of them shoved the door wide and grabbed my father by the arms. He stumbled back, shouting, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" But they didn't care. They twisted his wrists behind him like they were making an arrest. One barked into his fake radio. "Subject in custody. Bring the vehicle around." Neighbors peeked through blinds as the men dragged my 68-year-old father down the steps like he was some criminal. He tried to resist, but at his age, the struggle only made it worse. They hauled him toward their SUV while one of them kept repeating, "You should have just paid your dues." What they didn't know was that I was only a few streets away, cleaning my service weapon and checking case files. Because I'm not just his son, I'm a Federal Marshal. And when I got the call from a panicked neighbor telling me strangers were dragging my dad away in handcuffs, something inside me snapped. The second I hung up that call, my instincts kicked in. Years of chasing fugitives across state lines, serving high-risk warrants, and staring down men who thought they were untouchable all came rushing back. But this time, it wasn't a stranger. It was my dad. I threw on my jacket, badge clipped to the belt, and holstered my sidearm. My truck roared to life, gravel spitting as I tore out of the driveway. The neighbor's voice still echoed in my head. They dragged him into some black SUV with flashing lights. "Hurry!" I knew immediately what I was dealing with: wannabe tough guys trying to play police. But they'd made a critical mistake. They escalated from harassment to kidnapping. That turned everything from petty bullying into a federal crime. I spotted them 2 blocks down, pulling my father toward their SUV. He looked furious but exhausted, his hands yanked behind him with a cheap pair of metal cuffs that weren't even police-issued. I slowed the truck as I approached, keeping my face calm but my pulse hammering. The tallest one, clearly the ringleader, shoved Dad into the back seat. He turned just in time to see me roll up. "Move along," he barked, holding up a badge that glinted under the morning sun. One glance told me it was a dollar store knockoff. I stepped out slowly, hands visible, voice steady. "You want to tell me exactly what the hell you think you're doing?" He sneered. "HOA enforcement. This man is in violation. We're taking him to the office for processing." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe the audacity. "Processing? You clowns realize you just committed aggravated kidnapping, right? Right? That's 20 years minimum." The second guy puffed his chest. "Watch your tone. We're authorized officers." That's when I flashed my badge. Federal gold gleaming under the sunlight. Federal Marshal. You're not officers. You're criminals impersonating law enforcement. Let him go. Now their faces shifted instantly from smug arrogance to pale panic. The leader tried to recover, his voice cracking. "This isn't your jurisdiction." "Oh, business." I cut him off sharp. "My jurisdiction is anywhere in this country when a federal crime is committed. And right now, you three are guilty of conspiracy, impersonation, unlawful detainment, and kidnapping. So unless you want to spend the rest of your lives rotting in a cell, I suggest you put your hands where I can see them." The street had grown quiet. Neighbors stood frozen at their windows, watching the scene unfold like a live-action movie. My dad caught my eye through the SUV window and even cuffed. He gave a little nod, the kind that said, "Show them who you are." Son. One of the fake cops hesitated, lowering his radio. The third, the youngest, shifted nervously and muttered, "I told you this was too far." But the leader wasn't backing down. He took a step forward, hand inching toward his holster, some pathetic airsoft pistol painted black to look real. My voice dropped low, cold enough to freeze him in place. "Go ahead. Reach for it. See how that works out for you?" The leader froze, his hand suspended mid-reach. In that instant, everything shifted. Two neighbors, emboldened by my badge and my father's plight, stepped from the sidewalk. Phones came up, recording. The leader's bravado crumbled into panic. He barked orders that fell flat. I stayed calm, every training instinct focused. "Hands up. Sit on the curb," I said. They moved slowly, compliance replacing swagger. I kept them covered until patrol cars screamed around the corner, lights and sirens slicing the morning. Officers swarmed, taking control with the kind of precision only years on the job teach. The imposters were cuffed, read their rights, and led to squad cars. My father stood shivering, rubbing red marks where the cheap cuffs had bitten his skin. A deputy handed him a thermal blanket and a paper cup. A neighbor who had called me hugged him, voice shaking with regret. "We should have done something sooner," she said. He offered a faint smile. "You did what mattered." Detectives photographed the fake badges, the magnetic decals on the SUV, and the counterfeit forms. Evidence stacked up quickly: emails, payment links that rerouted funds, threats recorded on phones. The lead detective glanced at me, a brief nod of professional approval. "You kept a dangerous situation from becoming deadly," he said. By afternoon, the story had spread. Neighbors told their tales of fines, threats, and coercion. An elderly couple produced receipts proving they'd paid for non-existent repairs. A vendor admitted to being approached for kickbacks. The paper ran a piece, and the county prosecutor opened an inquiry into the HOA's practices. The imposters faced charges: impersonation, kidnapping, extortion. The HOA board, once untouchable, faced subpoenas and angry town hall meetings. That night, the block felt different. Porch lights stayed on. People lingered on stoops, sharing casseroles and stories, trading numbers of pro bono lawyers and citizen watch groups. A community that had been quieted by fear now buzzed with a new energy: accountability. My father and I sat on his old wooden porch swing under a flag that had weathered decades. He cupped his hands around a warm mug and watched kids ride bikes on the street he'd built playsets for. He turned to me, tired but content. "You did good," he said. "I thought of the paperwork ahead: statements, depositions, possible lawsuits. I thought of how justice often moves slow and dull, through evidence and hearings rather than instant vindication." Still, seeing neighbors stand up, swap receipts, and demand answers felt like a kind of victory more lasting than any viral clip. Before I left that night, families lingered, planning a meeting to overhaul the board and install legitimate security. I realized the real fight wasn't over a flag or a swing, it was the right to live, without fear of fake authority. As I drove home, the streetlight passed over the hood of my truck, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time: a neighborhood reclaiming itself. It wasn't cinematic. It was steadier, quieter, and it would last longer, and proud.